At my own baby shower, my cruel mother-in-law raised a glass and called me an outsider. But then my husband's sweet elderly grandmother, a woman lost in the fog of dementia, looked my mother-in-law in the eye and said, "You're an outsider too." And then she revealed the 30-year-old secret about my father-in-law's first wife and the tragic accident that killed her. Before we get to the party, I'd love to know, what city are you watching from today? And be sure to subscribe for more news stories every single day. Okay, let's head back to that baby shower. The baby shower was, in every sense of the word, my mother-in-law Genevieve's party. I was merely the main attraction, a walking, smiling, 7 months pregnant prop for her to display to her wealthy friends. The event was held in a private, sun-drenched atrium at her country club, a place so pristine and quiet it felt like a hospital. The guests were a sea of perfectly maintained women in expensive floral dresses, their conversations a low, competitive hum of gossip about their children's Ivy League acceptances and their recent trips to Europe. I sat in a large, throne-like wicker chair they had placed for me, a mountain of beautifully wrapped, obscenely expensive gifts at my feet, and I smiled until my face ached. My husband, Elijah, was a good man, the best man I had ever known, but he was blissfully, almost willfully, blind to his mother's particular brand of polite, smiling cruelty. He saw her meticulous, over-the-top party planning as a sign of her excitement. I saw it for what it was, a branding exercise for the next generation of the Montgomery family, a dynasty I had married into but had never truly been accepted by. My relationship with Genevieve was a long, cold war, fought with backhanded compliments and quiet, condescending remarks. I was a kindergarten teacher from a middle-class family. In her world, I was a nobody, a sweet but ultimately disappointing choice for her brilliant, successful son. She would constantly make little comments designed to remind me of my place. "Oh, Cora, you're so wonderfully frugal," she'd say, looking at the simple dress I was wearing. "It's a charming quality." The one person in that entire, vast family who had shown me nothing but pure, uncomplicated warmth was Elijah's grandmother, Hazel. She was 88 years old, a frail, bird-like woman, her mind a beautiful, but often tangled tapestry of past and present. Most days she was lost in the fog of her dementia, but in her moments of lucidity, her eyes were sharp and full of a mischievous, intelligent light. The family treated her with a kind of patronizing reverence, like a precious but fragile antique. They would speak about her in front of her as if she wasn't there, but I loved sitting with her. I would hold her soft, wrinkled hand, and she would tell me fragmented, looping stories about her late husband and her son Preston, my father-in-law, as a young boy. Today, she sat beside me, away from the main crowd, patting my hand, her presence a small, comforting anchor in the overwhelming sea of my mother-in-law's social circle. Finally, after hours of smiling and making small talk, the time came for the toasts. My best friend gave a beautiful, tearful speech, and then my mother-in-law, Genevieve, stood up, a crystal flute of champagne in her hand, a regal, practiced smile on her face. The room fell silent. To my wonderful son, Elijah, and to his lovely wife, Cora, we are all so thrilled to be welcoming a new baby, a new life into this family. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing with a deliberate, pointed intensity directly on me.
"It is so important," she continued, her voice dripping with a sweet, condescending poison, "to carry on the Montgomery name, the legacy that my dear husband, Preston, and I have worked so hard to build. And we are so glad that this baby," she gestured to my stomach, "a true Montgomery by blood, will finally, truly make Cora a permanent and official part of that legacy." The insult, so public, so profound, landed with a sickening thud in the pit of my stomach. She hadn't just called me an outsider, she had declared, in front of all her important friends, that my worth, my very place in this family, was conditional. It was something only my unborn child could grant me. The room filled with a brief, deeply uncomfortable silence before a smattering of polite, strained applause broke out. I just stared down at my lap, my face burning with a humiliation so intense I thought I might be sick, and I fought back tears. But just as the guests were beginning their polite chatter again, another voice cut through the air. It was a voice that was frail and thin, but surprisingly, shockingly clear. It was Grandma Hazel. She was looking directly at my mother-in-law, her head tilted, a look of genuine childlike puzzlement on her face. The room fell silent again, every eye now on the old woman in the wheelchair. "What a strange thing to say, Genevieve," she said, her voice carrying across the silent room. "What a strange thing to say about who is a real part of this family." She paused, and for a moment the fog in her ancient eyes seemed to clear, replaced with a sharp, focused, and incredibly lucid memory. "When you weren't the first one either." A deathly, absolute silence fell over the ballroom. My mother-in-law's perfect, triumphant smile froze on her face, then shattered, her expression turning to one of pure, horrified panic. And my husband's sweet, gentle, and confused old grandmother looked as if she was about to tell a story. A story that had been buried, locked away in the fog of her memory for 30 long years. The silence in the sun-drenched ballroom of the country club was a profound and terrible thing. It was not a quiet silence, it was a loud one, filled with the unspoken shock of 100 guests and the sudden, sharp intake of my own breath. My mother-in-law, Genevieve, stood frozen by the gift table. Her face, which had been a mask of triumphant, condescending pity just moments before, was now a ruin of pure, ashen horror. The words of my husband's sweet, confused old grandmother, Hazel, hung in the air between us, a wrecking ball that had just demolished the pristine facade of the Montgomery family. "When you weren't the first one, either." The guests, my mother-in-law's friends, stared, their polite party smiles frozen on their faces, their eyes wide with a delicious, scandalous curiosity. My husband, Elijah, rushed to his grandmother's side, his own face a mask of confusion and concern. "Grandma," he whispered gently, "what are you talking about? Mom is Dad's wife. You're just a little confused today." But Hazel's eyes, which had been so sharp and lucid just a moment before, were now clouded again, the fog of her dementia rolling back in. She just looked at him with a look of sweet, childlike puzzlement. "Was I talking? I was just thinking about the lovely cake." The moment of clarity had passed, but the damage was done. The seed of a terrible, unthinkable question had been planted. My mother-in-law, recovering with the speed of a seasoned social predator, immediately went on the offensive. She let out a short, sharp, and utterly false laugh. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice a little too high, a little too bright. "You all must forgive my dear mother-in-law. Her mind, it wanders these days. She gets her stories mixed up between her old stories and reality. Such a tragedy." She tried to steer the conversation back to safety, but it was too late. The polite applause for her toast had died, and in its place was a thick, awkward silence. The perfect party was ruined. My silent sacrifice, the one I had been making for the entire 2 years of my marriage, was the sacrifice of my own voice. I had endured Genevieve's constant, subtle campaign of emotional warfare in silence. I had absorbed her cutting remarks about my middle-class background, her condescending advice on how to be a proper Montgomery wife. I had smiled through her backhanded compliments and her quiet, constant reminders that I was an outsider who had gotten lucky. I did it all for Elijah. I did it to keep the peace, to avoid being the source of conflict in the family he loved. But as I sat there, the echo of her grandmother's words ringing in my ears, I realized my silence had been a mistake. I had been protecting a peace that was built on a foundation of secrets and lies. Later that week, the incident at the baby shower was the unspoken ghost in every room. My mother-in-law was cold and distant, treating me with a new, sharp-edged hostility. My husband, Elijah, was just confused, dismissing his grandmother's words as a sad, meaningless rambling from a failing mind. "You can't take what she says seriously, Cora," he had told me. "She gets her stories mixed up." But I couldn't let it go. You weren't the first one either. The words had felt too real, too specific, and the look of pure animal terror in Genevieve's face in that moment, that was not the reaction to a confused old woman. That was the reaction of a woman whose darkest secret had just been dragged into the light. My secret weapon was my own quiet, patient nature, the very quality my mother-in-law so often disdained. I began my own quiet investigation. I didn't ask direct questions. I just listened. I started spending more time with Grandma Hazel, bringing her her favorite tea, sitting with her for hours as she drifted in and out of her memories. Most of it was a beautiful, tangled mess of the past. But sometimes, a moment of pure, stunning clarity would break through. He was so handsome, my Preston. And his first wife, Annalise, she was a beautiful girl, an artist, so full of life. A tragic, tragic accident. Annalise. The name was a whisper, a ghost I had never heard of. I went to the local library, my old sanctuary, and I began to dig. I went through the microfiche archives of the Old Town newspaper, scrolling through the years, back 30 years, to the time before my in-laws were married. And there it was, a small, brief article from 1993, a single car accident on a rainy night in a winding country road. The victim was a young woman, a promising local artist. Her name was Annalise Croft, the beloved wife of the rising young businessman Preston Montgomery. The police had ruled it an accident, a tragic loss. 2 months after that article, there was another one, a society announcement. The wedding of Preston Montgomery to a Miss Genevieve Hayes, a close family friend, who had been a great comfort to him in his time of grief. 2 months. I sat there in the dusty, silent library, the pieces of a dark, forgotten story clicking into place. My father-in-law had been married before. His first wife had died. And my mother-in-law, the woman who had spent years making me feel like an outsider, had been waiting in the wings. My sacrifice was over. My silence was over. This was no longer just about me. It was about her. It was about Annalise, the ghost, the first wife whose memory had been so completely and totally erased. I had no proof of any wrongdoing. I had only the confused ramblings of an old woman and my own growing, terrible suspicion. But I knew, with the certainty that was as cold and as hard as a gravestone, that the story of my new family was not a love story. It was a ghost story. And I was going to be the one to give that ghost a voice. The discovery in the library archives was a spark in a tinder-dry forest. The polite, smiling facade of the Montgomery family, a facade I had tried so hard to become a part of, now seemed thin and fragile, and I could see the shadows of a much darker story flickering behind it. I returned home that day a different woman. The quiet, accommodating daughter-in-law was gone. In her place was a quiet, determined investigator. My days took on a new, secret rhythm.
By day, I was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother, enduring my mother-in-law Genevieve's endless, unsolicited advice on everything from nursery colors to prenatal vitamins. But by night, after my husband Elijah was asleep, I would retreat to my study with my laptop, and I would dig. I was a historian, sifting through the digital ruins of a 30-year-old mystery. I started with Annalise, the first wife, the ghost. She had been an artist, a painter of some local renown. I found old articles from the local paper reviewing her gallery shows. The critics praised her work as vibrant, passionate, and full of a fierce, joyful life. It was a description so at odds with the cold, gray, and emotionally sterile world of the current Montgomery family that it was jarring. I found her old art school records, her yearbooks. I was trying to build a picture of the woman who had been so completely and totally erased. Then I turned my attention to the accident. The official police report, which I managed to obtain through a public records request, was brief and tragically simple. A single-car accident on a rainy night. Annalise had lost control of her vehicle on a sharp curve on a remote country road and had gone over an embankment. She had died instantly. The case was closed. It was a perfect, tragic, and utterly convenient explanation. But my grandmother-in-law Hazel's words echoed in my head. I remember how your mother-in-law, the family friend, was there to comfort him so quickly. I began to dig into Genevieve. Her past was harder to find, more deliberately obscured. But I was a librarian's daughter. I knew how to search. I found her old yearbooks, her social records, and I found the connection. She and my father-in-law Preston had not just been family friends. They had been high school sweethearts, a celebrated golden couple long before he had ever met the artist, Annalise. They had broken up, for reasons that were unclear, just before he had gone off to college. The timeline was a chilling, perfect storm. Preston marries the vibrant, passionate artist, Annalise. His old flame, Genevieve, remains in their social circle, a quiet, ever-present friend. Annalise dies in a tragic accident, and a mere 2 months later, Preston marries his high school sweetheart, the woman who was there to comfort him. It was a story that felt too neat, too perfect. The turning point in my own quiet, secret investigation came from the most unexpected of sources. It came from Grandma Hazel herself. I was sitting with her one afternoon, just quietly reading to her, when she had one of her rare, beautiful moments of perfect lucidity. She looked at me, her ancient eyes sharp and clear. "You have her spirit, you know," she whispered, her voice a fragile, papery thing. "Annalise, you have her kindness." He tried to stamp it out of this family, but it came back. It came back in you. "Who, Grandma?" I asked gently. "Who tried to stamp it out?" "Preston," she said, her voice full of a 50-year-old sorrow. "He loved her so much, but he couldn't control her. She was a fire. And he was a man who was terrified of getting burned. He wanted a partner. He ended up with a possession." She looked at me then, her gaze so intense it was almost frightening. "The night she died," she whispered, her voice dropping, "they had a terrible fight, here, in this house. I heard them shouting. She had found something he was hiding. She said she was going to leave him, that she was going to expose him." "Expose what, Grandma?" I asked, my heart pounding. "I don't know," she said, the fog beginning to roll back into her eyes. "But he was so angry, so afraid. He told her she would never leave him, that he would never let her." She looked at me, her eyes now clouded with confusion again. "She drove away in the rain that night, and she never came back. A tragic, tragic accident." I left her room that day, my body trembling. It was no longer just a suspicion, it was a certainty. Annalise had not just died, she had been silenced. And my own family, the family I was about to bring a child into, was built on a foundation of a dark, terrible, and possibly murderous secret. I knew I couldn't confront them. I had no proof, only the fragmented memories of an old woman and my own gut feeling. But I also knew I could not, would not bring my child into a house of lies. My decision was made. It was not a decision for a grand public confrontation. It was a quiet, personal, and absolute one. I would not be the one to expose their past, but I would, with every fiber of my being, protect my own future. That evening, I sat down with my husband, Elijah. I told him everything. I showed him the newspaper articles. I told him what his grandmother had said. He listened, his face a mask of pale, horrified disbelief. He had grown up with the sanitized version of the story, the tragic tale of the accident. To hear this, to even consider it, was to question everything he had ever known about his own father, his own mother. "What do we do?" he whispered, his own world crumbling. "We leave," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "We build our own life, our own family, on a foundation of truth, away from this house, away from their secrets." The choice was his: to stay in the comfortable, wealthy, and poisoned world of his parents, or to step out into an uncertain future with me, with our child, with the truth. His decision, when it came, was the reason I had fallen in love with him in the first place. He took my hand. He said, "Okay, we leave." The decision, once made, was a strange and terrible relief. The moment my husband Elijah looked at me in our quiet bedroom and said, "Okay, we leave," a great, heavy weight I didn't even know I was carrying simply lifted. For 2 years, I had been trying to earn my place in a family that was fundamentally broken, trying to add a new, healthy branch to a tree that was rotten at its root. The struggle was over. The only thing left was to make a clean cut.
We decided we would not just disappear. We would not just pack our bags and leave a note. That was the cowardly way, the way of secrets and unspoken truths that had poisoned this family for 30 years. We owed it to ourselves, to our unborn child, and strangely, we owed it to the memory of the ghost named Annalise to speak the truth aloud, just once. We requested a formal meeting with Elijah's parents, Preston and Genevieve, in the grand, intimidating library of their home. They agreed, their voices on the phone cool and wary. They thought this meeting was about the disastrous baby shower. They thought we were coming to either demand an apology or to offer one. They were preparing for a small, familiar battle of wills. They had no idea we were coming to detonate a 30-year-old bomb. We walked into the library together, hand in hand, a united front. They were already there, seated in 2 high-backed leather armchairs, arranged before the cold, unlit fireplace like 2 monarchs holding court. "Elijah, Cora," my father-in-law, Preston, began, his voice a low, rumbling sound of authority. "I'm glad you requested this meeting. Your mother and I were very disappointed by the scene at the party. It was unseemly." "We're not here to talk about the baby shower, Dad," Elijah said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting off his father's predictable lecture. His courage, his strength in that moment was a beautiful thing to witness. "We're here to talk about something that happened a long time ago. We're here to talk about Annalise." The name dropped into the silent, wood-paneled room like a stone into a deep, still well. I watched as a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic crossed my mother-in-law Genevieve's perfectly composed features. My father-in-law's face hardened, his expression becoming a mask of cold, defensive anger. "Who has been filling your head with this nonsense?" Genevieve snapped, her voice losing its cultured edge, becoming sharp and shrill. "Was it your grandmother? You know she gets confused. She mixes up her stories. It's a tragedy, but you cannot listen to the ramblings of a senile old woman." "She wasn't rambling," I said, my own voice now joining the conversation. "She was remembering.
And she helped me find this. I reached into my bag and pulled out the faded newspaper clipping I had printed from the library's archives, the one detailing the tragic accident of Annalise Croft, beloved wife of Preston Montgomery. I placed it on the table between us. Preston looked at the clipping, then at me, his eyes full of a cold fury. This is ancient history, a painful family tragedy. It is ghoulish of you to bring it up. Is it? I asked, because Grandma Hazel also remembered a fight, a terrible fight, right here in this house, the night Annalise died. She remembered Annalise screaming that she was going to leave you, that she was going to expose a secret you were hiding, and she remembered you telling her that you would never, ever let her. That is a lie, Genevieve shrieked, shooting to her feet. Hazel is a confused old woman. She's inventing things. Preston, tell them. But Preston didn't say anything. He just sat there, his face a pale, grayish color, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He was not looking at his wife. He was looking at his son. "Dad?" Elijah asked, his own voice now a plea. "What is she talking about? What secret?"
And then, my father-in-law, a man I had only ever known as a powerful, confident, and unshakable patriarch, finally broke. He seemed to shrink in his chair, the weight of 30 years of silence finally crushing him. "It was an accident," he whispered, his voice a ragged, broken thing. He was not looking at any of us, but at some distant, terrible memory. "The fight. It was bad. She had found out about Genevieve." He glanced at his wife, a look of profound, ancient weariness in his eyes. "She was going to leave me. She was going to tell everyone. I was a young man. I was ambitious. I was a coward. I told her if she tried, I would ruin her. I would take you, and you would never see her again." He buried his face in his hands. "But I never thought she would actually go. She just got in her car, in the middle of that terrible storm. She was hysterical. I should have stopped her. I should have gone after her, but I was angry. And I let her go." He looked up, his eyes swimming with the tears of a 30-year-old grief. "The police said she lost control on the curve. A tragic accident. But it was my fault. I drove her out into that storm. I drove her to her death." His confession, a story of a cruel, cowardly threat, but not of murder, hung in the air. But Genevieve was not finished. "We did what we had to do to protect this family," she said, her voice now a cold, hard stone. "We did it to protect you, Elijah. That woman was unstable, volatile. It was for the best." Her complete and total lack of remorse, her chillingly practical view of the tragedy, was the final, damning piece of the puzzle. She was not a grieving family friend. She was a victor. Elijah stood up, his face a mask of quiet, profound disgust. He looked at his father, a broken man, and at his mother, a cold, unrepentant monster. And he made his choice. "We're not here to be your judge and jury for what happened that night, but we cannot and we will not raise our child in a house that is built on this foundation of secrets and cruelty and lies. We're leaving, Preston, Genevieve," I said, standing beside my husband, a united front. "We're moving away. We will build our own life, our own family, a family that is based on honesty and on truth." As we walked out of that dark, suffocating library, leaving my in-laws to finally face the ghost they had created 30 years ago, we passed Grandma Hazel in the hallway. She was being pushed in her wheelchair by a nurse. She looked at me, and for a moment, her eyes were completely, startlingly lucid. She reached out and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "He gave her a gift. You know, that night, before she left. A parting gift. He told her it was worthless, but she took it anyway." Her eyes full of a new, urgent secret held mine. It's still here. Somewhere in this house. He never found it. A new, colder mystery suddenly opened up before me. Our departure from this family was not just an ending. It was, I now realized, the beginning of a whole new search. We walked out of that dark, suffocating library and into the grand foyer of the Montgomery mansion, leaving my in-laws, Preston and Genevieve, to drown in the toxic silence of their 30-year-old secret. My husband, Elijah, held my hand, his grip a solid, grounding force in a world that had just been turned upside down. But as we were about to walk out the front door, a final, cryptic whisper from his grandmother, Hazel, had stopped us in our tracks. A parting gift, something Annalise had taken with her, something Preston had never found. It was a loose thread, a final tantalizing piece of a puzzle I knew I couldn't leave unsolved.
The weeks that followed our departure were a quiet, painful, and necessary severing. We moved out of the city and into a small, rented house in a quiet coastal town 2 hours away, a place where the name Montgomery meant nothing. We needed to build our own world, a world with a foundation of honesty. Elijah sent his parents a single, formal letter, informing them of our new address and stating that we needed space, that we would contact them when and if we were ready. The phone calls, when they came, were predictably manipulative. His mother, Genevieve, would leave tearful, guilt-ridden voicemails, not of remorse, but of a woman furious that her perfect family portrait had been shattered. His father, Preston, was a ghost, a man so broken by the weight of his own confession that he could not bring himself to speak. We did not answer. We needed to heal. But Hazel's final words haunted me, a parting gift. I felt a profound, almost spiritual sense of duty to the ghost of Annalise, the woman whose life had been so tragically cut short and whose memory had been so cruelly erased. Finding that gift felt like the final act of restoring her name. My research began, not in libraries, but in conversations with Elijah. I asked him to tell me everything he could remember about Annalise, the mother-in-law I had never known. He spoke of a woman who was vibrant and kind and who loved to paint. He remembered her having a small art studio, a converted sunroom at the back of the mansion that was always filled with the scent of turpentine and linseed oil. After her death, he said Genevieve had had the room cleared out and redecorated, almost immediately, erasing every trace of its former occupant. It was during one of our weekly visits to see Hazel in her quiet, sunlit room at the nursing home that the next clue emerged. She was having a lucid day, her eyes sharp and clear. I asked her about Annalise's art. "Oh, she was a wonderful painter," she whispered, a sad, fond smile on her face. "But her real gift," she leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper, "was in her frames. Her father was a master woodworker. He taught her how to build them. She always said the frame was just as important as the painting, a secret story holding the bigger one. A secret story holding the bigger one." The words sent a shiver down my spine. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. What if the gift wasn't something Annalise had taken with her? What if it was something she had left behind, something hidden in plain sight? The plan that formed was a long shot, a desperate gamble. I called my mother-in-law. My voice was polite but firm. I told her that before we could even consider a path to reconciliation, there was one thing I needed from the house, a single, small painting that belonged to Annalise, a sentimental object that Elijah remembered from his childhood. I described a small, insignificant-looking landscape of the coastline near the estate. Genevieve, desperate for any leverage, any chance to get back into our lives, agreed immediately. A week later, a courier delivered a dusty, bubble-wrapped package to our door. My hands trembled as I unwrapped it. The painting itself was beautiful, a small, moody seascape. But I wasn't looking at the painting. I was looking at the frame. It was a heavy, ornate, hand-carved wooden frame. And on the back, I found what I was looking for. A tiny, almost invisible seam. I ran my fingers along it and found a small, hidden latch. With a soft click, a thin, hidden compartment in the back of the frame slid open. Inside was not a jewel or a deed or a bank book. It was a single, folded, and brittle piece of paper. It was a letter written in Annalise's elegant, artistic script, and it was addressed not to her husband, but to her lawyer. It was dated the day before her accident. My husband and I read it together, our breath held, the words on the page a final, devastating voice from the grave. "Dear Mr. Davies," it began, "I am writing to you today to formally begin divorce proceedings against my husband, Preston Montgomery. The reason is not just his infidelity with my friend, Genevieve Hayes, a betrayal I have recently discovered. The reason is a crime. Last night I found a series of ledgers hidden in his study. They detail a systematic scheme of insurance fraud and arson he has been perpetrating for years, a scheme that destroyed the livelihoods of several of his early business partners. He is not just an adulterer, he is a criminal. I have made copies of the most damning pages. I cannot, in good conscience, remain married to such a man. I intend to leave him and take my son Elijah with me. I will be using this evidence to ensure my and my son's safety and freedom. I am afraid of what he will do when he finds out I know. I am leaving this letter and the copies of the ledgers with you for safekeeping, in case anything should happen to me." We stared at the letter, the terrible, unspoken truth of the last 30 years finally laid bare. The tragic accident was no accident. It was a silencing. My father-in-law had not just driven his wife out into a storm. He had driven her to her death to protect his secrets, and my mother-in-law had been his willing accomplice, the beneficiary of a crime that had given her a life of wealth and status. Our vindication was a quiet, somber, and deeply profound thing. It was not about revenge. It was about justice. A quiet, anonymous package was sent to the district attorney's office containing a copy of Annalise's letter and a detailed map to the location of the original ledgers. The investigation was quiet, but swift. Preston and Genevieve Montgomery, the celebrated pillars of their community, were arrested for their connection to a series of cold case crimes. Their perfect, beautiful world, built on a foundation of lies and a woman's stolen life, had finally, after 30 long years, come crashing down. It's been a year now. My husband and I sit in our own small, quiet home, a home filled with light and truth. Our baby daughter, whom we named Annalise, sleeps peacefully in her crib. I look at her and I think of the woman whose name she carries, a woman of fire and passion and a courage so profound that it reached out from beyond the grave to protect her son and to ensure that in the end the truth was told. The ghost of the first wife was finally at peace, and we, the family she had saved, were finally free. An absolutely unforgettable story about a dark family secret and a truth that would not stay buried. What do you think of the final incredible twist in the painting? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this powerful story of a decades-long mystery finally being solved, please show your support by hitting that like button and be sure to subscribe for more dramatic and satisfying stories. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.